I was eating, and all of a sudden, I felt cold metal resting up against my head. And he turned around, pointed the gun at me, and today we're going to be talking about my experience with guns in the United States. Hopefully, this will teach you a little bit about what it's like to live in a country where guns are the normal, where they're everywhere. So let's get into the story. And it starts with my first experience with guns. And that is when I was about 12 years old. You see, my father took me to a class which was called 4-H, and it was to learn about gun safety, how to safely use a gun. So for the first few months, we studied the theory of how different guns work, learning all of the different types of actions. We'll talk a bit about that later. However, after we learned the theory, we used pellet guns. Pellet guns are these guns that are not real in the sense that they shoot bullets with gunpowder. However, they shoot these little pellets using air. After a while, and after showing the teachers that we all were able to use these pellet guns in a safe way, we moved on to real guns. So, like I mentioned, we learned how to use all different types of actions. Actions are the way that a gun is loaded, fired, and the way that it ejects the cartridge after being shot. So, for example, you've probably seen, let's say if you play Call of Duty, a bolt action, or very commonly in shotguns, a pump action, or maybe in some crazy zombie movie, you've seen break actions. If so, then you understand what I mean when I say different types of actions. Well, eventually, I stopped going to these classes. However, I did learn some lessons on how to operate a gun safely. And for that, I am extremely grateful. 2 lessons that I learned that are absolutely essential is 1, never point a gun at something you're not willing to shoot. This means if I have a gun and I want to walk to the other side of the room, I must always have it pointed at the ground. I mean, you should never be swinging a gun around where there might be people, only towards the ground. And number 2, never put your finger on the trigger unless you're ready to shoot. I'm sure you've seen in movies or in music videos with rappers that they'll walk around with their finger on the trigger. This is a terrible mistake, which can very easily lead to an accident. Of course, after having such an experience with guns, I felt less scared of them because I realized guns are just a tool like any other. Well, then I had a gun pointed at me for the first time. So a few years later, I found myself living with my grandmother, who had moved in to the same house as my mother, my brother, and I. Now, she used to have a little game. The game was called, "Let's Call the Cops on Benji." So she would often call the cops and tell them, that I'm throwing a party or that she doesn't know who's upstairs, stuff like that, right? And one day I came home from school and she called the cops and she said, "Somebody is robbing my house." So of course the cops came thinking that they were going to find a violent criminal in the house. However, I had just come home from school. I was literally just at my desk listening to music and I heard the scream start. Now, I had headphones on, but I heard screaming, so I took off my headphones and I heard come out with your hands up right now. So I opened up the door slowly and I heard, let me see your hands. And so I stuck my hands out the door first. And he told me to slowly walk out and get up against a wall. So I did. Once against that wall, I turned around and I saw 6 grown men with their pistols aimed at me. And this was probably the first moment in my life where I thought, I might die right now. But unfortunately, it was not the last time. Getting shot at by a friend. Wow. So months later, after that experience that I told you about, my best friend texted me and he said, dude, I'm throwing a party tonight. Let me know if you want to come. Well, I knew that my buddy at that time was going through a lot and he was really addicted to drugs. And he had also just been robbed. So I kind of wanted to go there just to make sure that nobody was going to rob him again. So I ended up going. And I was in front of the house when I heard, Ben, you need to come to the backyard right now. Mason has a gun. So I went after him. And whenever I saw him, he was shooting in his backyard. And I said, dude, you're scaring people. You got to stop. And he turned around, pointed the gun at me, and luckily, the bullet landed in the dirt next to my foot. So I ran up and I punched him in his face. And I grabbed that gun. I unloaded it and I took it with me. And to be honest, when that happened, I didn't think that it affected me that much. I didn't feel traumatized, you know? It was like, it is what it is. He's intoxicated and he shot at me, whatever. At this point, the experience, it was just another stupid moment of my life, right? It wasn't a big deal. But little did I know, this was going to change my psychology for the rest of my life. Hey, if you really want to improve your English speaking abilities, you're gonna need to get someone to talk to. In the description, you can find a link with $10 off your first tutor session on Italki. That means you can get your first tutor session for like a couple bucks. Check it out if you're serious about improving your English. And let's continue with the video. So 2 weeks later, after the party, you might think, wow, this kid, he's already had 6 guns on him from the police. Then he got shot at by his buddy. What else can happen? You know what I mean? Well, a couple weeks later, I was just trying to forget, you know? Forget that my best friend just shot at me because he's so drugged up. So I went with my cousin to an old buddy's house. He was having a little bit of a get together. You could call it a party. And I was talking with my cousin. We were sitting at a table, talking. I was eating. And all of a sudden, I felt cold metal resting up against my head. And I heard a couple of dudes making jokes behind me. Now, I looked into the eyes of my cousin, and by the fear that I saw, I knew that there was a gun pointed at my head. So I looked at my cousin and I said, it's all right, bro. It's gonna be all right. And the guy pushed my head with the barrel of the gun and walked away with his buddies laughing. Another stupid experience that I thought didn't really affect me. Until it did. So, I mean, what did these experiences do to me? They made it really hard for me to trust anyone. I mean, I love people. I wish the best for everyone. But I don't really trust anyone. I can't eat in restaurants. You know, I can't put my back to people when I'm eating, because I can't let that happen again. And I know that the chances are so low that nobody's gonna come put a gun to my head, but I'm just not gonna risk it. And why did this stuff happen to me, you know? Is it because I grew up in a country where guns are everywhere? I don't think so. I come from a nice area. I come from Mechanicsburg. You know, it's like suburbs. It's beautiful. And, you know, maybe the people aren't the nicest, but they're not gonna rob you or kill you. But I hung out with a lot of stupid people, and a lot of them were not from Mechanicsburg. So if I would have been a normal kid in Mechanicsburg, I would have went to 4-H like I did. I would have learned how to use a gun properly like I did. But I would have only spent time with people who also took that training. You know, I would have went shooting with responsible people, and I would have never had to deal with feeling a gun to my head or, you know, things of that nature. As far as the police thing goes, well, there's not much I could have done about that. My grandma liked calling the police on me. That is what it is. But I didn't have to get shot at. That was my choice. I chose to have bad friends. And so I want you to understand that coming from a person who had bad experiences with guns, I don't think guns are bad. And I don't think that just because someone has a gun that they're a threat or that it's unsafe. It's only unsafe whenever an idiot has a gun. And a lot of the time, when an idiot has a gun, it's not legal. Unless they're cops, of course. But at the end of the day, guns are just like any tool, like a knife. You know, we use a knife every day to cut vegetables, cut fruits. But if you got an idiot with a knife, he might stab somebody. So if you are intimidated, if you are scared of coming to the United States because of guns, my message to you is don't go to bad areas, don't hang out with idiots, and you'll be absolutely fine. Remember, guns are not dangerous. Crazy people with guns are. Well, I hope that this gave you some insight, and maybe that it helped you learn a little bit of vocabulary in English. If you want the flashcards for the advanced vocabulary and expressions used in this video, check out the description where I'll have that flashcard deck made just for you. It was a pleasure seeing you again, friend. Have an incredible day. Goodbye.